She stepped onto the shooting range like a shadow against the afternoon sun, wearing worn jeans and boots that had seen better days. No medals around her neck, no insignias on her faded t-shirt, no entourage, no sponsor logos. Just a plain, simple woman with eyes that seemed too quiet for this loud place. The others didn't hide their amusement. Some leaned against benches, exchanging smug glances, muttering to one another like spectators before a circus act. This was their space. Ex-soldiers, private contractors, and wealthy enthusiasts whose rifles cost more than her entire wardrobe. To them, she was another amateur tourist, maybe a bored housewife thinking she could play in their league for fun. The snickers grew louder when she picked up an old bolt-action rifle from the rental stand, something so out of place amid the polished, modern semi-autos around her. She ignored them all. Her hands didn't shake. They moved with a deliberate calm, as if assembling something she'd done 1,000 times before. Her breathing was steady. No nerves, no visible fear. It unsettled them. Their laughter dipped slightly, replaced by murmurs of curiosity. One of the regulars leaned over to another. "You see that grip? Military maybe. Nah, just lucky posture. Probably watched a few movies." They didn't know that the rifle felt like home to her hands. Not because of any movie, not because of any weekend practice, but because it was survival. The kind you don't boast about. The kind you don't remember without nightmares. At the far end of the range stood the record board, engraved names, championship titles, leaderboards lined with the best. At the very top, one stood undefeated for years. 30 shots, flawless accuracy, standing record held by a former international champion who still visited occasionally to shake hands and be admired. It wasn't just a name, it was legacy, untouchable, mythical to these local shooters. Until now. She adjusted her footing slightly, left shoulder rolling forward, right hand relaxed but locked in. Her breathing slowed further. One of the bystanders joked, "Careful, Grandma, don't throw your back out." Her finger brushed the trigger like it was made of glass. One breath out. The bullet left the barrel with a crack that echoed across the dry hills. Silence followed, not the kind born from politeness, but the sharp edge of disbelief. Someone blinked first and checked the monitors, expecting a missed shot or, at best, a lucky grouping. Bullseye. Perfect. Right through the center, breaking not just the record but shattering it with precision that cameras couldn't quite capture. It wasn't luck. It was knowledge so ingrained into muscle memory that it was no longer conscious thought. Shot after shot followed in rhythm. Not rushed, not panicked. Just precision folding over precision, like notes played on an instrument only she knew how to tune. The disbelief turned to frustration. "Who is she?" Whispers sharpened into curses. The manager came out from the side building, squinting at the digital readout. The men who'd laughed earlier suddenly felt their egos dragging behind them like broken limbs. The woman never once glanced at them. Not because she was arrogant. Because she was busy calculating distances, wind drift, elevation angles, things most of these men had forgotten mattered in the age of computerized scope. One of them, a younger shooter with expensive gear and an oversized ego, stepped closer, voice cutting through the tense air. "You military? Must be cheating. No way some nobody breaks that record." She didn't even bother answering. Let the shot speak. That kind of silence was louder than any retort. Her last bullet landed perfectly where the first had, tearing a slightly larger hole through the center of the target. Cluster so tight the scoring computer paused, unsure how to calculate it. The record wasn't broken. It was obliterated. Someone cursed under his breath. Another took a photo of the screen, already uploading it with shaky hands to social media, eager to be the first to say he witnessed it, even if he didn't understand it. They didn't know yet that posting her would be a mistake. That face recognition databases would catch it. That someone, somewhere, watching encrypted feeds, would see the calm eyes of a ghost who wasn't supposed to exist anymore. To them, she was just some strange, quiet woman who didn't belong. To others, in hidden rooms and encrypted channels, She was a problem they thought was solved a long time ago. But here she was, standing before the broken shell of someone else's record, wiping down the rifle with careful precision, not out of pride, but habit. As if she'd done this before in darker places where there weren't trophies, only names written on walls, only targets that breathed and bled. She returned the rifle to the stand like someone returning borrowed time. The staff behind the counter stared, unsure whether to congratulate her or ask her to leave before more egos got bruised. None of them spoke. None of them moved. Except for the older man near the corner, someone who'd fought in real wars, who recognized the stance, the eyes, the breathing. His mouth was shut, his posture respectful. She walked past him, and he simply nodded once, like soldiers who knew not to ask questions they didn't want answers to. By the time the champion's record was officially updated, she was already gone. The video clips spreading online would soon be dissected, frame by frame, by people searching for identity tags, voice samples, fingerprints, and the name she'd left behind years ago would stir again, like embers being blown back into flame. But for now, she walked calmly down the gravel path, boots kicking small stones, disappearing toward the horizon like she was never there. They came here to watch a shooting competition. What they got was a warning. The surveillance system wasn't supposed to care about shooting records. It wasn't designed for sports or competitions. It was a military-grade monitoring algorithm buried deep inside a government server, tasked with identifying anomalies in precision, pattern recognition, and ballistic trajectories. And when her shot broke that long-standing record, the software flagged it, not because of the achievement itself, but because of the signature embedded within that shot. Patterns are like fingerprints, and hers had been buried long ago under layers of classified files. To most, she was invisible. To the system, she was a ghost resurfaced, and ghosts never came back without a reason. Somewhere, in a silent room fortified by encrypted data streams, a monitor blinked. Lines of code flowed like a river, ending with a sharp alert in red. H-13 match confirmed. Location: Civilian Sector 9B. Operator response required. The handler who read that alert was one of the few still alive who knew what H-13 meant. They didn't use names for people like her anymore. Names could be traced, could be used for leverage. Code names were safer, and hers was whispered like a bad memory. H-13, also known as the Architect, was not supposed to be alive, let alone standing in a civilian shooting range shattering records like a bored artist doodling on a napkin. The handler didn't move at first. He just sat back in his chair, steepling his fingers. This was not a coincidence. It was a message, but not to them. To someone else. Maybe herself. Maybe to whatever demons she was trying to outrun. Either way, it was unacceptable. Her resurfacing could trigger things best left forgotten. Operations buried with classified death. Families paid off to forget names. Governments looking the other way for favors promised but never delivered. And now she was here. Shooting perfect circles through peace and comfort with each bullet. While officials in intelligence rooms panicked and whispered among themselves, the shooters back at the range stood around like children caught cheating on a test. They didn't yet understand the storm they'd wandered into. They thought this was about pride, about someone showing them up. They had no idea the echoes of that shot were already racing through intelligence networks across 3 continents, pulling old mission logs from cold storage, matching scars, operations, betrayal lists. One man checked his phone and scrolled through feeds already commenting on the mysterious woman breaking the record. Influencers eager for attention debated whether she was military, private security, or just a prodigy with too much time on her hands. No one guessed the truth. The woman, meanwhile, walked with calm precision through streets lined with cracked sidewalks and tired storefronts. The world around her buzzed in digital noise, but her mind was somewhere else, calculating like it always did. Distance between alleys, reflection angles on glass windows, patterns of pedestrian movement, exit routes, escape plans. She never stopped doing it, even after all these years. It wasn't paranoia. It was training burned so deeply into her nervous system that walking through town felt like preparing for extraction. She didn't want to be this person anymore. She'd buried that life under cheap jobs, fake names, rented rooms that changed every 3 months, cash-only grocery runs, burner phones. But that shot wasn't an accident. Not entirely. It was frustration dressed as precision. After years of hiding, pretending to be small, pretending to forget, there was something satisfying about perfection. Not because of the record, but because she needed to know she could still do it. She needed to know the edge hadn't dulled. And now, the price of that one selfish shot was already stalking her shadow. The handler issued quiet orders from his desk. No alarms. No lights. Just silent movement in encrypted channels. Agents who specialized in disappearances, in quietly sweeping inconvenient pieces off the board, began their slow advance. They were told not to cause a scene, not to make a mess. She's worth more alive than dead. For now. Back at the shooting range, the younger men who mocked her were already talking bravado again, as if laughter could hide embarrassment. They didn't matter anymore. They were just pawns stepping onto a chessboard they didn't know existed. The real players were moving now, and the game wasn't about ego or competition. It was about what she knew, what she'd seen, what she could expose. The woman felt it, that invisible weight pressing against her spine. Years of instinct whispered what her logical brain didn't want to accept yet. They saw you. They're coming. It wasn't fear she felt. It was calculation. Fear is messy. Fear makes people run in straight lines. She didn't run in straight lines. She drifted. Like smoke through gaps in walls, like whispers curling under locked doors. Her entire existence was muscle memory designed to fade, to vanish before threats even realized they'd missed. Except now, she wasn't sure she wanted to vanish. The shot hadn't just broken a record. It had broken the shell she'd built around herself, the illusion of peace. Every movement of her body felt sharper now. Every heartbeat was a countdown, not of terror, but of inevitability. Ghosts don't get to rest. Ghosts haunt or are hunted, and she had spent too long pretending to be neither. The first message pinged her burner phone 2 hours later. Noise level detected. Operations moving. Advise relocation. Unknown contact trace confirmed. Whoever sent it didn't sign their name. Old networks. Friends, maybe. Allies, maybe. Or just professionals who respected what she once was and knew what the world would become if she was dragged back into it. Her response was simple. Just one word. Understood. There would be no running this time. There would be preparation. There would be planning. They thought they could sweep her off the board like she was a piece they still controlled. They forgot that she wasn't a piece. She was the hand that set up the board in the first place. She walked on, the weight of the past finally settling comfortably across her shoulders, not as a burden, but as armor. If they were coming, they'd better remember the rules of the game. Because she'd written them. The agents moved like they always did, slow and precise, rehearsed in 100 other takedowns that never made the news. No insignias, no conversation, just subtle hand signals and steady footwork. These weren't street cops or mercenaries. These were the specialists, the ones you sent when you wanted a problem erased before breakfast. And tonight, she was their problem. They didn't know her the way the old files described her. They only knew code names and summaries of former operations, half-classified war stories told in shadows. What they didn't understand was that she had written the ending to most of those stories. They were moving against the author, not the subject. She felt them before she saw them. A shadow slightly too thick, a reflection too deliberate in a storefront window. It was enough. She didn't panic. Panic is for people who haven't already rehearsed their own death 5 different ways before sunrise. Instead, she adjusted the strap on her bag with a subtle shift of weight, a single quiet signal to herself that she was about to become someone else again, not the drifter, not the tired woman at the range, but the one they tried to erase from record. And now the quiet war began, the kind fought between breaths, behind doorways, under streetlights. The first one moved in from her left, thinking he was clever, thinking he was unseen. His hand hovered near a hidden weapon, not drawn, just ready. Professional restraint. She gave him credit for that. Too bad professionalism doesn't help when you're fighting someone who's not following the same rules anymore. One twist of the wrist, one pivot of weight, and his balance betrayed him. His head met the brick wall behind her before he even finished his thought. She caught his weapon before it hit the ground. Quiet. Clean. No witnesses. But they weren't amateurs. As the first body slumped quietly into the alley shadows, two more emerged, adjusting tactics instantly. They didn't speak. She respected that. Language was weakness in situations like this. They moved to flank her, thinking they were boxing in a target. They hadn't realized yet that she didn't believe in boxes. Boxes are traps, cages, things used to hold people in place. She had spent her life avoiding cages. What they were creating was something else entirely, a bottleneck. And bottlenecks only work if the person in the middle doesn't know how to break the flow. The second man lunged first, fast and practiced. She stepped inside his range before he could finish his draw, turning his own elbow against him, feeling the ligaments shift and scream under her grip. His breath left his lungs in a sharp grunt as he dropped. The third one hesitated. Good. Hesitation was a mistake, and mistakes belonged to the dead. She didn't kill him, though. Not yet. His advantage was numbers, and she was about to take that away, one body at a time. They wanted her alive, but not unharmed. Orders said retrieval. Retrieval usually meant bringing something back broken but breathing. That was their mistake. They assumed she wanted to escape, assumed she was going to flee like a cornered animal. But she wasn't cornered. She was building her perimeter. And they had walked right into it. A sharp crack echoed across the alley as she fired once, low, deliberate, into the knee of the third agent. No scream, just a collapse, quiet professionalism meeting raw pain. Another weapon acquired, another piece of their plan stripped away. She was collecting their mistakes now, cataloging each one with clinical precision. But she knew better than to think this was over. These were advance unit. Recon and retrieval, not full assault. The main wave wouldn't be far behind. That gave her minutes at best before the situation escalated into something the whole neighborhood would notice. And that was the last thing she wanted. Civilians in crossfire weren't acceptable losses to her. Not now. Not ever. The real fight wasn't just here, though. It was happening behind screens, behind code, in encrypted channels where orders were being typed by cold hands far from danger. Somewhere in those networks was the one who gave the order. Somewhere was the handler who thought they could put her back in a box. She didn't owe them fear anymore. She owed them answers. The sound of approaching engines confirmed her suspicion. More were coming. Black vehicles. No insignias. Night work. Suppressors on rifles. Professional cleanup crew. She didn't have an army. She didn't need one. What she had was preparation, and that was more lethal than numbers. While they came with numbers, she moved with intent. Intent doesn't miss. Intent doesn't hesitate. Intent doesn't sleep. While the world above thought it was still ordinary, cars driving by, neon signs flickering over convenience stores, the quiet war had already started, measured in broken bones, stolen weapons, shattered assumptions. She wasn't the hunted. She was the invitation to a mistake no one could afford. The first black vehicle rounded the corner, headlights off. Timing sharp. Formation predictable. She was already gone from the alley before they arrived, her path folding through forgotten stairwells, drainage tunnels, rooftops that hadn't been repaired in decades. Urban camouflage wasn't just hiding. It was using the shape of the city like fabric, stitching yourself into spaces no one remembered existed. They underestimated her. Again. A soft vibration buzzed against her hip. Another burner phone. Another message, this one traced through secure relays. Active hunt confirmed. Leave immediately. Assets in play. Status requested. She didn't reply immediately. Instead, she watched the formation of agents fanning out below her position, tactical formations sharp, but predictable. She could dismantle this team piece by piece if she chose to. But not yet. Not now. Not here. The war wasn't in this alley or on this rooftop. The war was in the information buried behind passwords, hidden names, and the quiet rot in the command centers that built people like her and discarded them when convenient. And they wanted her alive because dead bodies can't talk. But living ones can testify. Living ones can reveal secret. Living ones can pull entire programs out of the dark with a single whispered name. That's what scared them. The real weapon wasn't the rifle. It wasn't the training. It wasn't even her muscle memory forged through years of brutality. It was her memory. The things she knew. The things she'd been ordered to do. The lies she could untangle if she wanted to. She typed her reply, one-handed, watching the tactical teams search empty spaces she had already abandoned. Status confirmed. Intent established. She didn't need saving. She was going hunting. The message didn't take long to reach him. The handler sat in a quiet room, dressed like someone used to blending into boardrooms and security briefings. No uniform. No rank insignias. Just tailored gray fabric, polished shoes, and the kind of eyes that had long ago stopped seeing people as people. They were assets, liabilities, problems, solutions. And right now she was all four at once. H-13 active. Signature confirmed. Conflict escalating. Field assets compromised. She wasn't just alive. She was deliberate. She was making decisions, not mistakes. And that was a problem because people making deliberate moves usually had goals. Goals meant plans, and plans meant leverage. He didn't like leverage unless it belonged to him. He issued the order himself, bypassing the usual approvals, bypassing the paper trails. This wasn't the kind of situation that could afford hesitation. He wouldn't kill her. Not yet. Not if he could help it. Dead, she was a loose thread cut off from the fabric. Alive, she was still useful, still connected to the deeper layers of unfinished work. But if she refused to cooperate, if she refused to come back into the fold, then the cleanup wouldn't stop with her. It would sweep through anyone she had contact with, anyone who might have known where she'd been hiding, anyone who might remember her real name. He sent the offer. It came through secure lines, encrypted at levels most agencies never touched. Not a threat, not yet. Just a voice message, distorted to prevent tracing, but clear enough that she'd know exactly who was speaking. The voice was calm, almost friendly, like someone welcoming an old friend home after years apart. It didn't start with orders or accusations. It started with familiarity. It's been a long time. I never thought you'd make it this far off the grid. Impressive, really. But you knew it would come to this eventually. They always do. You don't belong out there, drifting through old neighborhoods pretending to be something you're not. You belong here, with us. We need you. And more importantly, you need us. You don't want to spend the rest of your life running, do you? It was the kind of message designed to sound reasonable, rational, like the only sensible conclusion was to come back and fold herself neatly into their system again. They knew how to speak to former operatives. Isolation. Frustration. Loneliness. Make the offer sound like relief, not imprisonment. What they didn't count on was that she'd been alone by choice. She listened to the message without expression. Offers like that always came dressed in politeness first. Threats wore silk gloves before they wore boots. She knew how these games worked. Make the target question their strength. Make the target wonder if fighting back is worth the energy. Make them wonder if maybe, just maybe, it's easier to comply. But they didn't know why she'd left. They thought she'd run because she was tired or scared. They thought she'd broken because of stress or failure. They thought she was weak. The truth was worse. She hadn't run because she was weak. She ran because they were cowards pretending to be leaders. She had seen the files they tried to hide, the missions ordered in clean conference rooms with tea and biscuits while families burned in the margins of their reports. She had followed orders long after she knew they were wrong. And when it became clear that her skill wasn't being used for protection or peace, but for power, profit, and political games, she walked away. Not because she couldn't keep going, but because she refused to keep playing their game. Now they wanted her back. Not because they missed her. Not because they respected her. But because she knew things. Things that could drag names and faces into tribunals, hearings, headlines. Things that could ruin men like the handler sitting comfortably in that secure office, wearing that tailored suit, pretending to be untouchable. The voice message ended with a carefully crafted pause. "I'll give you 12 hours. After that, I can't make promises about how clean this gets. You know how these things go. 12 hours. That wasn't a deadline. That was arrogance, assuming she'd use the time to run, to hide, to cry in some quiet hotel room while helicopters circled overhead. They didn't know she wasn't wasting energy on running anymore. Running had been useful before. Running had kept her alive while she figured out what she wanted to do with the weight of her own regret. But now, she wasn't carrying regret. She was carrying intent. She typed her reply, direct and without hesitation. "I don't kill for broken flags anymore." No explanation. No apology. Just truth. They'd know exactly what it meant, too. It wasn't about patriotism. It wasn't about loyalty. It was about refusal. About accountability. About facing what had been done in the name of symbols and banners that no longer meant anything when held up next to the faces of the dead. Faces she still remembered. Faces she still saw when the lights were out and the quiet crept in around midnight. The handler read the message on his secured device and stared at it for longer than necessary. He wasn't used to refusal, especially not from her. He'd recruited her himself, back when she was barely more than a name on a promising recruit list, just another ghost in training. She'd been perfect for their plans. Sharp, quiet, brutal when required, disciplined beyond reason. A professional's professional. And now that same precision was being turned against them. Not with bullets. Not yet. But with defiance. And that was always the sharpest edge. He activated secondary protocols. If she wouldn't come back willingly, they'd use leverage. Not threats of death. That would be predictable. No, they'd dig into old networks. Friends, distant relatives, forgotten acquaintances. People who might not even remember her face but could be turned into bargaining chip. She didn't have children. Didn't have family anymore. But she had history. And history could always be exploited. He underestimated her again. She wasn't just planning how to survive. She was planning how to break them first. They underestimated her commitment to standing alone. That was their mistake. They thought she was still the kind of person who needed a team, a network, someone to watch her six. Once upon a time, that had been true. Back when she was younger, back when loyalty still meant something, she fought for people beside her, relied on others to keep the perimeter safe, trusted others with her blind spots. That version of her was gone. Burned out like an old star, collapsed into something denser, sharper, more dangerous. Trust was a weakness they could exploit. Standing alone meant no one could be leveraged against her, no weaknesses to be used as handholds. They tried anyway. As night fell over the city, the agents began their quiet approach, black boots on old concrete, silent formations threading through alleyways and rooftops, surrounding intersections without drawing attention. The civilians around them kept moving, unaware of the quiet hunt unfolding around them. The people watching from a distance thought it was still a competition about shooting, about one impressive record on a random day. They didn't know it had turned into a hunt. And they definitely didn't know who was hunting whom. Her mind wasn't focused on the threat itself anymore. That part was easy. Predictable. She could see the patterns before they finished moving into formation, could read the hesitations in their steps, could predict exactly where they'd try to corral her. It wasn't new. It wasn't clever. It was textbook, just like every mission she'd ever been on back when she was one of them. That wasn't the danger. The danger was complacency, thinking this was just another extraction team trying to wrap up a rogue operative. But it wasn't extraction anymore. It was elimination disguised as protocol, clean up wearing the mask of professionalism. She positioned herself not for escape, but for message delivery. They wanted her captured because silence was more valuable to them than noise. She had a different idea. The world didn't need another body disappearing into classified detention. The world needed truth, and she wasn't about to play their game quietly. She'd played quiet for too long, and it got her nothing but empty rooms and unfinished memories. One of the younger shooters from the range showed up at the edge of her view. He wasn't supposed to be there. He should have been home bragging about his new social media video, posting shaky footage of her record-breaking shot. Instead, he followed her, curious, maybe stupid, maybe both. For a second, she thought about telling him to leave, but there wasn't time. And when the first round cracked overhead, missing both of them by inches, it wasn't her instincts that moved. It was the old reflex, the one drilled into her from years of hard lessons. Protect the civilian. The mission is secondary. The protection is the mission. She dragged him behind cover before he even understood what was happening. His confused protests didn't matter. Civilians were leverage, and she wasn't about to give them one. Another round. Suppressed. Professional. But off by just enough that she knew they were pushing, not trying to kill yet, just pushing her toward their net. They didn't factor in the variable they should have been most afraid of. She was no longer bound by their rules. She dismantled their formation with brutal precision. Not with wild shots or bursts of panic fire, but with surgical disassembly. A suppressor taken from one agent earlier was fitted onto a captured sidearm. 3 rounds, center mass, no noise except for the muffled pop of gas and metal. Another sweep around the building's edge. Another agent down before his partner even realized he'd been flanked. They were trained for urban combat, sure, but trained to expect their targets to panic, to run, to make mistakes under pressure. They weren't trained for someone who'd helped write the manuals they studied. The kid, to his credit, didn't scream. Maybe his ego was still too bruised from earlier. Maybe he was too afraid to make a sound. Either way, it worked in her favor. But now he was a problem. Not because he was loud or clumsy, but because he was another person she had to account for, another life that could be used against her. And she hated liabilities, not because she didn't care, but because she cared too much to leave people behind, even strangers who should have known better. 2 more agents tried to rush from opposite side. Predictable angles, predictable tactics. She dropped to one knee, took the first down with a shot through the hip, deliberately non-lethal, because dead bodies attract too much heat. The second froze just long enough to be intercepted by the young man, who swung wildly with a broken piece of pipe he must have grabbed off the ground. Sloppy, ineffective, but it distracted the agent long enough for her to finish the job with another clean, silent shot. Now they knew. Now the handlers back in their clean rooms saw it for what it was. Not containment, not retrieval, but collapse. Their perfect plan was falling apart not because she was unpredictable, but because they had relied on predictability for too long. They followed flowcharts. She followed instinct. They sent professionals. She was something else now. Something older, deeper, sharper. They built a machine to contain her, but machines break. And when they break, they don't know how to adapt. By the time the next black vehicle screeched around the corner, she had already moved 3 blocks ahead, blending with the normal movement of the city, using noise and motion as camouflage. The young man followed without asking. Maybe fear, maybe awe, maybe just the simple human desire not to die alone. It didn't matter. He wasn't her mission. But now he was her responsibility. She didn't save people out of heroism. She saved them because it was right, and doing right was all she had left. The handler watching from the secure room finally broke his composure. Reports were coming in scattered, incomplete, full of phrases like lost contact and unknown position. It was a beautiful thing, really, watching professionals choke on their own confidence. This wasn't just extraction gone wrong. This was collapse. They still thought they could win because they still didn't understand what they were dealing with. They didn't understand that this wasn't the start of something new. This was the return of something they had hoped was buried and forgotten. But things buried don't stay that way when they're left unfinished. She wasn't finished yet. Not with them. Not with this city. Not with herself. They thought bringing more men, more guns, and more technology would solve the problem. That's how they always thought. More force, more control, more silence. But the more they tightened their grip, the more everything started to slip through their fingers. It wasn't about numbers. It was never about numbers. It was about understanding the fight before it began, and they never understood this fight. They thought they were the only ones with leverage. They thought she had nowhere left to go, no friends, no resources, just skill and bad memories. What they didn't realize was that while they were sending teams to trap her in alleys, she had already been dismantling the system from the inside. The first breach came through an old back channel, one she'd left untouched for years, waiting for the moment she needed it. A forgotten account, tied to an encrypted storage node buried behind layers of false companies and outdated DNS entries. Inside that node was the truth they had tried to erase. Files, names, coordinates, mission summaries redacted so heavily they were nearly unreadable, but she had the keys. She always had the keys. And now those files were being fed, piece by piece, into independent leak sites, distributed through onion-routed servers, copied onto secure flash drives hidden in lockers across 3 cities. By the time the agency realized something was wrong, it was too late. The trick wasn't just uploading the data. It was making sure the right people noticed. People with followings. People who cared more about the truth than about staying safe. Journalists who had been waiting for something like this, proof of the things they'd whispered about but never been able to prove. War crimes hidden under diplomatic handshake. Civilian deaths recorded as enemy combatant. Entire villages wiped off maps with official stories of natural disasters, but now exposed with coordinates, time-stamped photos, internal memos signed by officials still in office. They wanted to erase her, and instead she was erasing them. The handler's calm started to break under the weight of incoming alerts. Not from field teams, but from international monitoring agencies, from investigative reporters tagging officials on public feeds, from anonymous groups dumping files into public forums faster than they could scrub them. Scrubbing wouldn't help. It was already replicated across so many servers that deletion was meaningless. Every deletion spawned 5 copies somewhere else. This wasn't a leak. It was a controlled detonation. And she was the one holding the detonator. The young man who followed her earlier was still there, eyes wide, trying to understand what he'd been dragged into. He didn't get it yet, but he was starting to see the edge of it. The way normal rules didn't apply here, the way the quiet, tired-looking woman who had broken the range record wasn't just good with a rifle, but was holding something bigger than a weapon. Information was heavier than any bullet, sharper than any blade, and more permanent than any scar. They came again, this time with full gear, heavier vehicles, broader perimeters. Streets were locked down under the guise of police operations, but the masks slipped too quickly. Cameras caught agents in tactical gear moving like soldiers through civilian street. Protesters started appearing, people demanding answers. Social feeds flooded with footage of masked men shoving bystanders out of the way. In trying to control the narrative, they exposed themselves faster than she could have hoped for. Their arrogance was the knife they handed to her willingly, assuming she'd never know how to use it. She didn't want to lead protests. She didn't want to be a symbol. She didn't care about movements or revolutions. She just wanted them to pay. Not with death, that was too quick, too clean. She wanted their legacies stained, their carefully polished reputations reduced to footnotes of disgrace. She wanted them to feel what every village they'd erased had felt. Forgotten, betrayed, discarded, used. The messages came faster now. The handler trying to regain control. Offers of negotiation. Clean records, new names, fresh passports, even money, absurd amounts of it, as if cash could buy silence when blood couldn't. He didn't understand. This wasn't about money or safety. This was about finishing something that should have been finished a decade ago. She started releasing names, one by one, to trusted contacts she'd kept distant but alive, people who had nothing to lose, people who knew how to spread data like wildfire through networks that didn't care about law or loyalty. One of those names was his. The Handlers. Complete dossiers, dates, mission logs tied to him directly. Suddenly, the man behind the curtain was standing under floodlights, exposed before people he used to command with a word. And still they came, desperate, reckless, loud where they used to be silent. They sent drones now, circling like vultures, scanning rooftops, infrared signatures chasing shadows. They were following the wrong patterns. They still thought she was playing defense. They didn't realize she wasn't hiding. She was positioning. While they scrambled across streets and fired panicked orders into radios, she was moving through systems, unlocking old caches, exposing shell companies, bank accounts used to launder blood money into polished suits and luxury cars. Real estate portfolios funded by operations labeled security interests. And then she let those files loose too. One by one, posted in places they couldn't reach in time, downloaded, mirrored, analyzed by thousands of strangers with motives they couldn't predict or control. The young man finally spoke, voice shaking but clear. "Why are you doing this?" She didn't answer for a long moment, just moved through another sequence of access codes. When she did speak, her voice wasn't angry. It wasn't passionate. It was steady. Because they never answer for what they do. Not unless someone makes them. The Handler tried one last desperate maneuver. Threats against people she might have known. Relatives. Old friends. The usual tricks. She deleted the message without reading it fully. Those people were already gone, buried or hidden long ago. He was bluffing. That was all he had left. Threats don't work on someone who's already given up everything that can be taken. By morning, major news outlets had picked up the story. By noon, foreign governments issued statements demanding investigations. Embassies went quiet. High-profile resignations started to leak through unofficial channels. The agency was collapsing not from a single hit, but from rot exposed to sunlight, unraveling thread by thread because no one could hide it anymore. She didn't smile. There was no victory in it. Only necessity. They thought they were the architects of silence. She was the architect of their ruin. The final pieces of the game were falling into place, not with explosions or gunfire, but with the slow, surgical precision of reputation collapsing under the weight of undeniable evidence. This wasn't a firefight. This wasn't a chase. This was demolition in reverse. Unbuilding, unraveling, not one foundation at a time, but all of them together, pulled apart by hands that knew exactly where the structural weaknesses were because she'd helped build the structure in the first place. They thought she was dangerous with a rifle, but that was their biggest mistake. Bullets can kill bodies. Information kills futures. The Handler, once the untouchable architect of silent wars and black operations, sat now in the same quiet room, but the walls didn't feel like protection anymore. They felt like containment. The reports flooding in from every direction told the same story no matter how many times he tried to spin it in his head. Operations compromised, agents exposed, offshore accounts frozen, political allies distancing themselves, contacts disappearing into the fog of deniability. The carefully balanced web of control he had spent his entire career weaving was fraying at every edge, and every unraveling thread led back to her. It wasn't supposed to be like this. She was supposed to break like the others before her had. Isolation was supposed to work. Fear was supposed to work. The threat of force was supposed to work. They didn't understand that she wasn't afraid of them anymore because she'd already survived the worst parts of what they'd created. Everything they tried to use against her, they'd already used before. There was nothing left in their arsenal she hadn't already seen, felt, and endured. The young man who followed her had changed too. His fear hadn't disappeared, but something else had begun to replace it, understanding. seeing something bigger, uglier, older than he'd ever imagined behind clean institutions and patriotic speeches. He'd thought breaking records at the shooting range was about pride, about showing off, about being better than the next person on the bench. Now he understood that the real records that mattered were the ones hidden in sealed rooms, the kind that measured lives stolen, governments toppled, and power shifted, not for security, not for peace, but for profit. She didn't bother telling him to stay behind anymore. He wouldn't listen now. But she kept him at the edges, away from the real fights, the sharp ones, the ones that didn't leave bruises but scars you carried in your memory long after the bodies were cleaned up. He didn't belong to that world yet, and she didn't want him to. He was already involved more than he should be, but at least she could keep the worst parts off his shoulders. The agency kept pushing. Not with tactics but with panic. Deploy more teams. Issue public statements. Push denials. Hire private firms to handle PR disasters. But none of it mattered. The feeds wouldn't stop. The documents wouldn't go away. The more they tried to scrub, the more it spread, like a wildfire burning through dry grassland on a wind-fed summer night. Every old mission resurfaced. Every falsified report. Every cover-up. Faces they thought were forgotten reappeared in headline after headline. They weren't just dealing with an operative gone rogue, they were dealing with history refusing to stay buried. The handler finally made one last mistake. He reached for the one tactic they always kept in reserve when all else failed: contractors. The kind that don't wear badges or tactical uniforms, the kind who operate under numbers instead of names, paid in cryptocurrency and favors, not loyalty or patriotism. He didn't care about saving the agency anymore. He only cared about saving himself. Private warlords, quiet killers, freelancers who knew better than to ask why, only how much. She was ready for that too. Every time they escalated, she was already standing at the next intersection, waiting for them to arrive. It wasn't luck. It wasn't guessing. It was knowing how they thought, because they'd taught her how to think like them once, and she had been better at it than any of them wanted to admit. You don't outrun people like that. You outthink them. You don't fight them where they expect you. You make them fight their own shadows while you dismantle their weapons piece by piece. And when the contractors came, expecting to catch a tired operative running out of resources, they didn't find desperation. They found traps, exposed bank accounts linked to their real identities, leaked dossiers connecting them to unsanctioned operations, photos, voice recordings. Not just data, they found themselves exposed to the same light they used to destroy others. Suddenly they weren't hunters anymore. They were prey. It didn't take long for the first of them to switch sides. When faced with exposure, with global networks of activists and independent journalists watching their every move, self-preservation kicked in. They weren't patriots. They were business. And bad business gets cut loose fast. Within hours, some of those hired to kill her were feeding her even more information, flipping on their contractors not out of loyalty, but because betrayal was safer than becoming collateral damage in someone else's downfall. The handler received reports of defections and stared at them with disbelief. He was watching his entire power base melt underneath him, not from violence, but from exposure. The only thing worse than being hunted is being seen, and now he was visible to the world in ways he could never have imagined. She moved through the last stages of her plan without hurry, methodical, not because she was savoring it, but because finishing things properly matters. Leaving loose ends was what caused all of this in the first place. She was done leaving loose ends. They called her names behind closed doors. Traitor, terrorist, extremist, but none of that mattered. None of those labels could stop what was happening, and the louder they shouted them into the void, the less people listened. People don't care about names when the evidence in front of them is undeniable. You don't need a symbol when the truth is ugly enough to stand on its own. The young man finally asked her what everyone else would have wanted to ask if they had the courage. What happens now? She didn't have a dramatic answer for him. No speeches. No cinematic lines. Just the same steady, even voice she'd carried from the start. Now they burn or they rebuild. Doesn't matter to me. I'm not here for either. It was never about taking over. It was about dragging the rotted foundation into the sunlight, forcing the world to choose whether to keep living on top of a lie or tear it down. She didn't want thrones or revolutions. She wanted responsibility returned to the people who'd been told they didn't deserve it. The handler was already gone by the time his name made the evening headlines. Disavowed. Exiled by his own people. They'd cut him loose to save themselves, same as he'd done to others. His legacy wasn't classified anymore, it was viral. As for her, she didn't stay for the aftermath. Heroes give speeches. Leaders build coalitions. She didn't want either. She disappeared back into the places between places, not to hide, but to breathe. They wanted her forgotten. Now they would never forget.